Hello everyone, welcome to Unit 11. I hope you're doing well. We will be covering World War II in this unit, and this will actually take us to the cutoff point for this year's AP exam. So you are expected to know information up to 1945. So this unit will take us there. And then colleges have asked AP teachers to continue to at least review the rest of the content that will be missed this year. So we'll watch a couple of videos that will quickly take us through about 2008, and then we will begin to review for the AP exam, which, as you know, is a 45-minute DBQ, 5 documents, a 10-point rubric, but you're not expected to do anything that you don't already have to do. They've just added more points to it. So more info on that to come. All right, so today we're looking specifically at the causes of World War II. And one of the first one, remember back to the causes of World War I, we talked about the main causes being militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. A lot of these causes are actually the same for World War II. This is expansionism, but this is basically imperialism. And this is just the doctrine of expanding a country's territorial base, or sometimes just their economic influence over other countries. And usually this is done through military aggression. And there are 3 places in particular where this type of doctrine was really prominent. Italy was one such country. By this point, they had been taken over by fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. And his goal in life was to recreate the Roman Empire. So he wanted to build a new Roman Empire that would be based around the Mediterranean, like the first Roman Empire was. And he invaded Albania in 1939 at the start of the war. He later invaded Greece. And they had actually previously invaded Ethiopia in 1935. That failed, but they would try again and succeed in taking over Ethiopia as well. And so the League of Nations tries to punish Mussolini for this, and they rebuke him, basically. They throw some harsh words at him, and then they have an oil embargo where they try to keep oil out of Italy, but this ultimately fails in stopping Mussolini from expanding. And then also in Europe, you have the Nazi regime in Germany that begins its own program of expansion. And they want to restore the, quote, rightful boundaries of historic Germany. And so this is the idea of Greater Germany. And so there were German speakers who lived in different parts of Europe. And so German leadership wanted to annex those portions of Europe where there were German speakers. And they, of course, would begin to do this. And then thirdly, in Asia, you have the Japanese who are attempting to build an empire in the Pacific Ocean. Keep in mind that Japan had just recently modernized and caught up with the West in terms of technology and industry and transportation and things like that. Because the United States forced them to open, they did so and very quickly modernized and decided that they too wanted a piece of the imperialistic pie. And so they began to invade China. They captured the city of Beijing in 1937. This is actually before World War II technically breaks out. And they overtake Manchuria as well. But the goal was to build an empire in the Pacific. All right, this is another cause that was a World War I cause that is also a World War II cause. It is simply militarism. Militarism is just the principle of keeping a large military, and the point of keeping a large military is to display how dominant your state is, or how dominant your country is. And so Germany, Italy, and Japan, these are the 3 that we just mentioned as expansionist countries, were also pursuing aggressive militaristic policies. Part of that was so that they could expand, and part of that was to display world dominance. Okay, and then another cause of World War II is the Treaty of Versailles. So we talked about the Treaty of Versailles when we covered World War I. this was one of the things that Woodrow Wilson was warning the other allies about in its harsh treatment of Germany. And he correctly predicted that the Treaty of Versailles would devastate Germany and cause great resentment and probably another great war, which he was pretty much entirely right about. And so the Treaty of Versailles, just a reminder, it forced the Germans to demilitarize. They had to cut down the size of their army to like 100,000 men. They had to cut down the size of their navy. They had to pay billions of dollars in reparations. They had to accept full responsibility for the war. They had to give back territory, like all of their colonies were lost. And so the Germans greatly resented the Treaty of Versailles. And because of the massive amount of reparations that they had to pay back, mostly to France, caused them to experience, which all countries that were a part of like the globalized world at this point experienced the Great Depression. But Germany felt it greatly because of this treaty and because of the reparations that they were unable to pay back. So very few jobs, the price of food, the price of basic goods was very high. So as a result of this economic depression, as a result of this devastation, these people were not pleased with the German government. And so this led them to vote in Adolf Hitler, who promised to tear up the Treaty of Versailles and who promised to restore Germany to its former greatness. It's important to keep in mind that Hitler initially came to power legally. He was voted in. And if you listen to his speeches, they are super charismatic. They're loud. I don't know if you've seen that episode of The Office where Dwight tells Michael to swing his arms and, wave his fists and things like that. But that is what Hitler looks like. In fact, you should go to YouTube and look up a Hitler speech, a real Hitler speech, because he is very animated. Because of that, he was voted in. All right, so the failure of appeasement. So there was a guy, Neville Chamberlain, who became the British Prime Minister in May of 1937. And he agreed that the treatment of Germany by the Treaty of Versailles was extremely harsh, and he believed that the things that were wrong with the treaty needed to be made right. And so in order to prevent another war, and in order to make up for how harsh the Treaty of Versailles was, he pursued this policy of appeasement. He believed that if he gave in to Hitler's demands, then it would prevent another war. And the greatest example of this is in the Munich Agreement, which was signed in September of 1938. This is almost exactly 1 year before the war officially breaks out. And the Munich Agreement allowed Nazi Germany to annex parts of Czechoslovakia. The reason why they allowed this was because there were German speakers who were living in these portions of Czechoslovakia. And so that served as Hitler's justification for taking this region over. And Neville Chamberlain kind of stood by the wayside and said, yeah, we permit this. We will not attack you for this, even though it kind of goes against the League of Nations, which Germany was not a part of anyway. But he was hoping that by appeasing Hitler, he could prevent a world war. It's kind of like when you go to the store with a toddler and you get to the end of your shopping trip and they're super tired and you're super tired and they're screaming in the aisle, begging for M&Ms, and you just give them to them because you want the kid to stop screaming. That is appeasement. And that is sort of what the British were doing with Hitler. Okay, so another cause of World War I is the failure of the League of Nations. Not all countries joined the League of Nations. First and foremost, the United States. This was Woodrow Wilson's idea. This was his favorite of the 14 points, and he could not convince the Senate to ratify the treaty to join the League of Nations. And so the United States was not a part of it. Germany, as punishment for having started World War I, was left out of the League. Russia was also excluded because people began to increasingly fear communism. So not everyone joined the League. In addition, the League really didn't have very much power. They did not have an army. Basically, if the League of Nations decided to send out an army, then the member countries would have to give up their own soldiers to go fight wherever they were needed to fight. Really, the only weapon they had was that they would ask member countries to stop trading with an aggressive nation. So, like when Japan invaded Manchuria, basically all the League could do was tell them not to invade Manchuria and encourage the other nations to stop trading with them. Once the Depression hit, though, countries who were even a part of the League of Nations really didn't want to let go of trading partners because their economy was so unstable anyway. And so this really, for real, they didn't have very much power at all. They only met 4 times a year, and in order to accomplish anything, they had to have unanimous agreement, a 100% vote. So yeah, they were unable to act quickly. I guess I got ahead of myself there. So when countries called on the League to intervene, they had to call an emergency meeting. But other than that, like I said, they only met 4 times a year, and there had to be a 100% unanimous vote to achieve anything. So that process meant that the League of Nations could not act quickly to stop an act of aggression. And finally, the official start date of World War II is September 1st, 1939, and this is when the Germans invade Poland. By this point, they had invaded several places, and because of the policy of appeasement, it was allowed, but at this point they had no justification whatsoever for invading Poland, other than it became obvious that Hitler wanted to take over Europe. And so at this point, the British give up their policy of appeasement, and the French and the British declare war on Germany. I don't know if you remember from a previous class, but Germany and Russia, or the USSR, had actually signed a non-aggression pact that if war broke out, the two powerful nations would not fight against each other, but there was a secret clause in that pact that said that they would divide and conquer Poland, which they successfully did in like less than a month. And so kind of like World War I, this thing erupts quickly, and many nations are involved after just a couple of months. All right, that is all for today. I hope you have an awesome day, and don't forget to send me your notes.